Hello, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning. My name is Richard. I'm based in London, and I'd like to welcome you to the Pearson English Spring Days series of webinars. Today, we have a webinar from Margaret O'Keeffe, who is going to be taking us through how to teach business English to advanced learners. And we'll be using examples from the new business English course, Business Partner. Margaret is based in Barcelona in Spain and teaches both general and business English to adults and young adults. She is a speaking examiner for Cambridge English Assessment, a presenter at ELT events, and a materials writer. She has also authored several course books, including Market Leader, English for International Tourism, Lifestyle, and most recently Business Partner. There will be time for questions at the end, although please feel free to add a question in the chat box, which I see a lot of you have found already on the right-hand side as we go through. Sometimes it can go very quickly, so if we miss a question, we're sorry about that, we'll try and catch them. But with that, I'll now leave you with Margaret. Over to you, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Richard, and welcome everybody. I just like to go through some housekeeping for the start of this presentation. So this webinar is in fact recorded, and within 2 weeks of this event, you will receive the link to the recording in your email, and it will take you to the YouTube. And you will also receive a personalized certificate for this session and a virtual goodie bag. So yes, the title of the session is about teaching business English at advanced levels. And what I'm talking about, in fact, is the C1 level of the Common European Framework references for languages there. And I'd like to look at some of the key challenges that we're looking at this level. First, by talking a little bit of an overview of what the C1 level students are, or business English students are, and then look at some key challenges that are affecting them at this level. Number two being the enriching and broadening their vocabulary range, how we do that. Another one is looking at how we can help them develop their reading competence. And also then we're going to look at the communication skills for the workplace, how we can help them with that, and finally how we can help them with business writing. Now, the first thing I'm going to do though is give you a little poll to find out a little bit about your teaching context. If you just bear with me for a moment, I'll just switch over to the poll. Okay, I think I hope you can see that in front of you now. And there are 4 questions there for you. Which is your teaching context? Are you teaching people who are in further education or in higher education mostly? Are you teaching adults in company, professionals already working? Are you teaching a broad mixture of both of those groups, or are you actually not teaching any business English, but you're interested in the subject? And I'll just give you a little while to answer those questions. Okay, so at the moment, it looks like most of you, the highest number is 16% so far, are teaching young adult learners in further and higher education. Then the next group is teaching 10% so far are teaching adult learners in companies. That could be one-to-one classes, small group classes, intensive classes. Then we have smaller group that are teaching both sets of students. And then there's a few people who are not teaching any of those groups, presumably, but are interested in the topic. Yes, upper secondary students would go into the second group there, young adults. So they might be 16 plus, 16 to 18 in further education. Quite a lot of people are doing both. Okay, just another few seconds there. Any more people would like to vote? Okay, so it looks like most people have now voted, and I'm going to end the voting and show you the results. Okay, so what we found is that 10% of you are teaching adults in companies, 19%, so almost double that, are teaching young adults in further and higher education. And then there's a group, an 8% group, that are teaching both groups, and then there are about 8% who are teaching neither group. Now, this is actually very interesting, because what you find is that the vast majority of business English students in the world today are actually in education. They're pre-work students. So that's very important to be aware of that. And so that's quite interesting that your votes reflect that as well. So let's have a look then. I'm just going to move back now to the presentation. Okay. So who are our adult business English learners? Obviously, we said there are two groups, largely two groups. And there's a little group in the middle there. There's a little bit of overlap because I find sometimes as well, when I'm teaching in company classes, there might be some young adults there who've recently graduated, and they often don't have very much business vocabulary, or they don't know the skills that they need, for instance, for business presentations and business meetings and business writing. So it's kind of like, if you like, three large groups, but certainly the biggest group of English learners today are the pre-work students in the world. So a question for you now then, what are some key differences between these two groups of students in terms of their needs, etc.? Think about some key differences and write them in the chat box. Exactly, yes, absolutely. So the pre-work students don't have work experience. They have very little knowledge. Absolutely. The in-work students are more aware of their needs because they have very immediate needs. The pre-work students may be not clear, might have not clear about the motivation. Uh-huh. Yes, of course, the in-work students have experience of work, and they're using their language daily at work. They're using their English for their jobs, for communication. Okay, let's look at some things I've put here of some key differences. So obviously, as we said, their needs, the in-work students have got more immediate needs. The syllabus is going to be quite different. So with the pre-work students, you're very often working through a course book. The syllabus has been decided by the institution and the teachers on the course, whereas a syllabus with in-work groups is going to be negotiated very often about what you're going to do in class, and some of that material might come from the course book, and some of the material, quite a lot of that material, will actually come from the students and what they need for work, whether it's their presentations, their writing, etc. That's of course content. The assessment, obviously, the assessment is going to be different because with pre-work students, they're working towards an assessment, an exam that will give them a qualification, and that often influences their motivation, because when you're working in class, you'll hear them say time and time again, "Is this going to be in the test? Is this going to be in the exam?" So they're kind of like, the motivation to learn is very often based on the assessment. Whereas in company classes, assessment might be more informal. It's kind of, again, it can be negotiated, and it can be very work related and very practical. Of course, class size is very different. I've worked in institutions where it's 30, 40 students in the class. I know in some parts of the world that could be 100 students in the class. That's a very different dynamic from in company classes, where it might be one-to-one, small groups, threes, very small groups. Class level, the bigger groups in universities are going to have much more variety of level as well, I think. Classroom management, I think, for both types of groups is an issue, because both types of groups have got distractions. In your university classes, you'll have the distractions of social media, mobile phones, colleagues in the class, and very often, in fact, in company classes as well, you're going to have some of those issues, because people are having to keep an eye on their mobile phones. They're getting phone calls for work. They might have interruptions. They might arrive late. Their attendance is going to be less consistent than in a university class. Layout obviously is very different. So in a university, it's going to be teacher fronted with the whiteboard. When I'm teaching in companies, I'm very rarely standing up in front of the group. I'm usually sitting at the desk as if it was a meeting with my students, and I'm writing notes. So it's very much a kind of meeting forum. And obviously, the teacher's role is going to be different in both those situations. So at the university, pre-work students, the teacher is going to bring the expertise of the business world there. You're the kind of business expert that you have to bring the content there, the themes into class. Whereas in company classes, they are the experts on the theme. One thing, obviously, they do have in common is the level that they're hoping to achieve, and their language competencies at C1 level. And this is what the Council of Europe's Common European Framework of Reference for Languages says as an overview of the level. And the first item is referring to reading, but of course vocabulary as well. It's saying can understand a wide range of more demanding, longer texts and recognize implicit meaning in them. So that's very much reading and vocabulary, I think, there. The second and third items are to do with the speaking expression, so that can express him or herself fluently and spontaneously, and can use language flexibly and effectively for social, academic, and professional purposes. Obviously, our pre-work students are using language effectively for social and academic purposes, but they won't have that much experience of the professional purposes, and that's what we're hoping to do in the classroom, is bring that language in and help them prepare for the world of work. And the last item is to do with their writing and their written expression, and it says can produce clear, well-structured, detailed text on complex subjects, showing correct use of organizational patterns, connectors, and cohesive devices. And we can see again, our pre-work students will have experience of essay writing, but will not be that familiar very often with the genre of writing that they need, the genres of writing that they need for the workplace. So we're going to look today at how we help them with that. Let's start then at one of the key challenges we talked about, which is vocabulary. And this is a very big area for students when they reach advanced level. And what we're hoping to do is obviously help them broaden and enrich their vocabulary. So let's look at what the framework says about the vocabulary range, what they should be able to do. Has a good command of a broad lexical repertoire. And that when they don't have this command, that they can express themselves fluently and say what they want to say in another way. I think that's very important. And can command and good command of idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms. So what we're trying to do then is help our students develop their vocabulary and be more fluent when they're speaking. And so how do we do that? Well, question for you again for the chat box. What does it mean to know a word? What is involved in knowing a word? Yes, how to use it, how to recall it. What does it mean to know a word? What are the different aspects of knowing a word? Exactly, know how to use it. Know the collocations, absolutely. Know the pronunciation. Know the degree of formality of that word, absolutely. Absolutely. The register. So is it formal, is it informal? Know how to spell it, know how to pronounce it. Absolutely. Absolutely. So knowing a word means a lot of things. And what you find by this level is that, for instance, we're going to need to help them a little bit more to expand the meanings that they know of certain words. Let me give you an example. For instance, the word order, the noun order, is among the top 1,000 written words in the English language and the top 1,000 spoken words in the English language. This is according to the Longman Dictionary of Contemporary English. But when you look at the dictionary, what you find is there are actually 25 different entries for the noun order. It has 25 different meanings. So there's a lot to knowing the meaning. There's a lot just to knowing the meaning of a word. Obviously, you also need to know the connotations of the word. So if you mentioned that, is it a negative word? Is it a positive word? Is it formal? Is it informal? What you also need to know, what you also need to help our students with is this idea of knowing the different parts of speech. So you know the noun, you know the verb, you can use suffixes, you can use prefixes, that you can build the word from the base word, other words related to it. Some of you mentioned collocations, of course, and phrasal verbs, obviously the word and if it's have any phrasal verbs. So at this level, we're helping students very much with word families, collocations, phrasal verbs, and broadening their notion of meanings of a word. I think what we find often with phrasal verbs at this level is students have a very good passive knowledge of a lot of phrasal verbs, but they're not using them actively. So we're hoping to move them towards using them more frequently to help their speech be seen more natural and more colloquial. So let me give you an example from the C1 level of business partner, the business partner course book, of a vocabulary lesson and how it's done. This vocabulary lesson is from Unit 1, Lesson 1, and it's about innovation. And as you can see there in that yellow box, it says lesson outcome. Learners can use vocabulary related to innovation. Now, the topic area of innovation itself is not a C1 level, because you can still talk about innovation at other levels, at lower levels, but you have a range of vocabulary at those lower levels. So what we're talking about is talking about innovation and upping the vocabulary level when you're talking about this subject. And to introduce the topic, we have some leading questions, some more personalized leading questions, and then they're going to watch a video. So it's a clip of authentic video where we're going to be looking at the language from that video. In this particular video, it's from the BBC, and it's talking to an innovation director at Microsoft. So there's some comprehension work from that, and then we're going to move on to the vocabulary from the video. And we start off with a lexical set around innovation that has come up naturally in context from the interview with this director from Microsoft. And you can see it's not a neat lexical set that you might get at a lower level when you're talking about something like fruit or animals or something like that. It's obviously quite a mixture of different parts of speech and different types of words. So there's some nice interesting things thrown in there, like the adjectives unorthodox and well thought out. What we see here as well, we've got code as a verb rather than code as a noun. So we've introduced some of the vocabulary from the video, and then we're going to expand on this a little bit, keeping it connected to the topic area of innovation. And here we're going to look at collocations, and we're looking at some of the verbs and adjectives that are collocate with problem and solution. So again, we're expanding the vocabulary there using more C1 expressions. And then we're looking at a derivative from innovation that collocates with all of these nouns. So again, it's helping them with collocations, presenting them, giving them to practice them. Moving on, we're also, with the same theme, we're looking at phrasal verbs connected to innovation that have come up from the video, and we expanded a little bit to give it a kind of a set of words that are related to help with memory, to help with meaning. And you can see there that the phrasal verbs and prepositional verbs are highlighted in bold. The students have a task to match the two parts of the phrases, and then they're discussing the question. So they're getting an opportunity to use those words. And then they get some extra practice there with a bit more discussion work from all that vocabulary. And if you see on the left-hand side there, we have the, I'm just going to highlight that. The teacher's resource extra activities, and this is something to help with more recycling, more repetition, more practice of the language. They're PDF files that you can go into, and if you're teaching online, you can show them on screen, or you can email them to the students as PDF so that they have that material for extra practice. The other things that we have for extra practice are the unit review lessons, and there's photocopiable vocabulary exercises in the teacher's resource book for every unit. So they're given lots of opportunities to repeat the vocabulary, to re-encounter the words, to recycle them. And obviously teachers as well can do more work with that themselves in terms of Kahoot tests and little quizzes and things like that. So very important that we remember that repetition and recycling and re-encountering words are going to help with memory and remembering the words. So that's a little bit of vocabulary. Another useful tool that you might be interested in is the Global Scale of English Teacher Toolkit. You can go to english.com and get that for free. And it has different categories, as you can see here. We've got learning objectives, grammar, and vocabulary. And I'm just going to show you how the vocabulary tool works here. So we can see here that we start off with the scale, the Global Scale of English, and the Common European Framework scales are there. For C1, for instance, there you go. So that helps you if you want to pin down words within a certain language level. The next thing that we do is we've got the type of learner. Is it adult learner or is it young learner? You can choose, and you can see down here that you've got the filters that you're putting in are available there. You can also choose topic areas. So you might want to limit the vocabulary by particular topic areas. It could be art, could be business. Within business, there are different subcategories as well that you might want to look at. Another option that you've got here is the grammar, the part of speech. You might look at nouns, you might want to look at verbs, you might want to filter that down as well. Another alternative is to just key in a word that you want to find out the meaning. Again, look at meanings at different levels. You can find out, click on show result to see what you get, and then down the bottom you will get pronunciation in British English and American English. You will get a definition, you will get an example sentence, and you will see what the GSE level is and what the CEFR level is. So that's quite a useful tool, and it's one that we use quite extensively when we were writing the C1 level materials. So it's available to you if you'd like to use that as well. Okay, the other area of vocabulary that's really important to mention is obviously one area of vocabulary comes from the course book materials. Another area of vocabulary comes from emergent language that comes up in the classroom. Where does this emergent language come from? Well, it might come from your students in two different ways, that the students are having a conversation and they need a word, they need to say something, they don't know how to express it, so the teacher is helping them with that piece of vocabulary. It might be that a student's used a good phrase or a good word, and the teacher thinks, oh, that's a useful phrase or word for the rest of the class to learn. I'll put that on the board, I'll make reference to that so they can use it as well. And it might, the third obviously source is the other source is the teacher. It might actually come from the teacher, where you think this might be a useful little expression that students might want to use. This is the emergent language from my last face-to-face classes on the 2nd and 9th of March in company. And it was about my students. They work for an in-company class. They work for a distributor of international products and for industry. And obviously they were talking about the situation as it was developing. And so it's very useful vocabulary came up, and they were going to be needing that for their conversations on telephone and in emails afterwards. And we were able to, I was making notes, and what I do afterwards is I share it in a Google document, and the students get that information. And then in the next class, we might follow up. So as you can see here, like I was able to pull out stockpile as the verb, stockpile as the noun. We contrasted that with hoard. And we looked at some interesting vocabulary. And what happened was also I introduced the expression a knock-on effect and a worst-case scenario to help them. So I think that's a very useful, another important area of vocabulary learning for students, and it's the most important for them in company student classes because they need that vocabulary for their jobs. That's enough about vocabulary for now. I'll come back to it later. The next area I wanted to look at was reading, and the types of readings that we do in class, the types of sub-skills that we practice. And one of the things I want to say about reading, it's obviously very, very important at this level, and I'll explain some reasons why in a moment. But I think one of the things that happens is that our students, by they reach advanced level, I find they're enjoying, a lot of them are already enjoying watching TV programs and watching Netflix and TV series and things like that in English. So they kind of often become quite comfortable with watching English. But I think enjoyment and reading in English really don't quite go together for a lot of our students. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for us, and it's a challenge for them. Okay, so this is what the CEFR says about overall reading comprehension to be a C1 level learner. You can understand in detail lengthy, complex texts, whether or not they relate to his or her own area of specialty, provided she can reread difficult sections. So it's very clear there. It's saying they need to be lengthy, they need to be complex, and they're not necessarily related to your field of expertise. So how is that going to happen? I think a lot of our students are very used to now reading lots of stuff. They are reading lots of stuff. We're all reading lots of stuff on mobile phones and stuff like that. But I don't think a lot of it is detailed, lengthy, and outside of our area of specialty. So what we're doing in the classroom is one thing, right? In the classroom, we're practicing intensive reading. And this is an example of a typical way that you might do this in class. This is an example from Unit 4 of the C1 Business Partner course book. And the topic is disruptors, which is very relevant, I think, for the world that we're living in today. And as you can see, the lesson outcome is learners can use a variety of forms to express hypotheses. So the reading text here is going to be used for reading comprehension and sub-skills on the one hand, and it's also going to be used for grammar work on the other. But vocabulary will come into this. So the students get a lead-in exercise. There's no assumption that they know anything about disruption, disruptors. definition there for them to look at. And then before they read the text, they're going to do a little prediction task. It says here, number 2, read the article. Are any of the ideas you discussed in exercise 1 mentioned? So they're given a reason to read, as we usually do. And then they're going to skim the text and see if the things they mentioned come up in the text, in fact, or not. So the kind of intensive reading we're doing in class is the following. The text length is generally short. It's in this case, around 400 words, because it has to fit on the page and you have to do the comprehension work and the grammar work afterwards. So it's going to be around 400 words. In terms of the genre, it's like a business article, as you can see here from the Financial Times. In terms of the level, what we're very often doing at the lower levels is we're simplifying the text. At the C1 level, the text is not being simplified in terms of language. It is all authentic language. But what we're doing is we're shortening the article. So it's going to be abbreviated article here. So that's one thing to bear in mind. It's not lengthy, detailed text. It is detailed, but it's not lengthy. And then the next thing we're going to do with this is get students to do another subskill, which is scanning. And what they're doing here is they're finding evidence in the text for these statements. Are they true or false? So what they're doing now is they're looking at each thing. So fundraising strategies, find the reference to fundraising strategies, that expression in the text, and see if they can find out if that information is true or false. So it's a scanning exercise. Other sub-skills we might practice in this classroom would be things like the writer's intention, inference, reading between the lines. They're the typical sub-skills that we practice in the class, right? So that's all well and good. Yeah, that's all well and good. And one of the other thing I wanted to say, sorry about this, was this thing here, the extra help with reading. So we're going to get teachers' resources, extra activities that will go into the vocabulary from the text. There'll be some more vocabulary work there for them. The other help that they will get with reading in the course book will be in the teacher's resource book, there'll be longer readings again, but it's newspaper articles around business and the same topic, but there'll be kind of longer articles that will practice more intensive reading skills, sub-skills, vocabulary, etc. So we need another type of reading as well that's not going to be covered in the classroom materials. And I'm going to talk about these two types of reading, extensive reading and narrow reading. And extensive reading is very much about the learners themselves choosing to read longer texts out for pleasure, for interest. And it's also choosing the suitable reading level. Narrow reading is about it's a form of intensive reading, but it's more focused, where you might choose to read, for example, novels by the same author. What's interesting about that is that the language you will encounter will be repeated more often, because authors kind of have favorite words and favorite expressions and ways of saying things that will get repeated. So that's going to up the help with reading. Also, another type of narrow reading is dealing with the same theme or subject. So for instance, this is very good for educational purposes. You might want to learn something about digital marketing, and you might read different texts around that particular issue, different journals, different books, but it'll pretty much throw up the same lexical area, which is useful for repetition and re-encountering words. So I have a question for you. I'd like you to reply in the chat box here. What can we do to support students to do more extensive reading and narrow reading? We do a lot of intensive reading with our course book in class, but what can we do to support them and encourage them to do more of these other types of reading? Yes, exactly. Report back on what they're reading. Give them some help with choosing what to read. Absolutely. Again, I wouldn't give them any activities or tasks to do with the reading very much, because they're reading for pleasure, but you might want them, yeah, quite right, to summarize what they've been reading, to tell you a little bit about it, see whether they'd recommend it or not to the other people in class. Yes, I think reading circles, absolutely. Reading clubs. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yes, and we provide a model as ourselves as good readers. We provide a model of being a good reader and talking about something you're reading, for instance, and recommending it. Yes, and obviously it might not be just novels. Obviously, it's also journals. It's also longer articles online materials. Yes, absolutely. Extensive reading depends very much on their interests. Exactly. So the things we can do the things we can do are the following. I think, and I've kind of divided it into three areas. I think one of the things is that we need to do is provide them with strategies for choosing extensive reading. So, what is going to be your choice of book? I often find that my students are choosing what they think they should read rather than what they want to read. And I think that's going to be a source of frustration for them rather than interest and pleasure. So really, if there's a certain genre that you like to read in your own language, it's best to go for that genre if you're reading in English as well. I think you need to think about give a mixture of fiction and non-fiction. Again, we need a broad range of reading. What non-fiction would they like to read? They need to think about things like how they're going to read, what they're going to use to read on. Is it going to be their mobiles? Is it going to be a book? Is it going to be an e-reader? The time, when are they going to find the time to read? What point in the day would they find time to read? So talk about that. And I think really importantly is this, I think about the suitable reading level. They really need help to find out what is a suitable reading level, because I think very often people are over ambitious. And if you're reading for pleasure and you're reading for fluency, then the studies seem to suggest that you need to understand between 95 and 98% of what's written. And that is really, really important that students know that when they're choosing something to read. There's another strategy which is called the five finger rule, which is that you would choose, if you're thinking about choosing a book, you would look at a page of text and you would see if there are more than 5 words that you can't that you don't know, you don't recognize, that you can't guess the meaning of. And if there's more than 5, then you're not actually going to be reading doing extensive reading. So I think that's really, really important that we can help them with those strategies. Obviously explain the benefits explicitly, which I'm going to do next. And also I think check in with students to follow up on what they're reading and what they're doing. One option might even be to include it as part of the continuous assessment. So, give them a reason to do it, but it's got to be pleasurable for them and it's got to be chosen by them rather than the teacher. Yes, it really is a high percentage, isn't it? Yeah, it's between 95 and 98%. And I just don't think most of us teachers and most of us students aren't aware of that. But that seems to be what the research findings are. So let's look at some of the benefits that we could explain to our students of extensive and narrow reading. Obviously, it's going to provide comprehensible input. It's going to provide a lot of language for students, a lot more language than they're going to get with just attending their English classes. This is really, really important because it's going to help improve their language competence, both reading language fluency and speed. It's going to help them with incidental vocabulary acquisition. It's also going to help them to not forget words, of course, as well, because if they're seeing them or re-encountering them, it's going to help them with that language. It seems to improve writing. Studies have found that it improves their writing because of their awareness of syntax through reading. Huge benefits there. Obviously, it's going to encourage students to make choices about language learning. It's going to make them more aware of language autonomy. It's going to promote lifelong learning. When I say lifelong learning, I don't mean as a language learner, because we know language learning is a lifelong process, but also maybe for their careers and their professions, actually reading in English is going to be very, very valuable for them. And I know my students in work, that is something they do have to do quite a lot. And obviously it forms good habits. It's like anything, it's habit forming. You've got to get into the habit to be good at it. And if you can start doing it, then you're going to be motivated in the future to read more. So I think it's very important that all of those things are there. When I talk about incidental vocabulary acquisition, it actually doesn't happen very fast. They reckon that you learn maybe between 2 and 4 new words in an hour. So it's not massively efficient, but it is very, very effective. Okay, let's move on to another challenge for our students, particularly our pre-work students. And this is this issue of communication skills, the communication skills that they need for the international workplace. So on the one hand, they're going to need the business skills, the typical business skills of meetings and presentations and email and socializing, etc. But there's another element to communicating in international teams, which I'd like to focus on here today. And these are some of the topics that are covered in the C1 level there, you could see, and I'm going to focus on one of those lessons now. Let's see again what the C1 speaking criteria were, that you could be flexibly and effectively communicate, use language for professional purposes is very important for our pre-work students, that they get opportunities to do that in class. Another issue that I want to mention very, very briefly is mediation, linguistic mediation. There is a blog in Pearson on this and a podcast, which you want to find out more about mediation. You can just go into Pearson blogs and find that information. So mediation, for those that don't know, the Council of Europe in 2018 brought out a companion volume to the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And this companion volume talks a lot, has produced a lot of descriptors on linguistic mediation. What is mediation? Well, on the one hand, we know that it's to do with resolving conflict, for instance. That's one type of mediation that's covered in the descriptors. The other very, very important type of mediation is a broader meaning. It's this idea of working between two languages, language A and language B. Sometimes it might be the same language, but you're mediating between, for instance, audiences. So a typical situation would be you're dealing with a non-expert audience in something, a specialty, your field, but you're having to talk to a non-expert audience. So you're going to have to adapt the complexity of your presentation. That would be mediation. So it's really relevant for our students. And we have mapped the business partner materials to the descriptors from the CEFR in a lot of the speaking and writing tasks. This particular descriptor here for mediation is relevant to the lesson I'm going to show you now. Okay, so here's a communication skills lesson, and it's about pitching ideas. And as you can see, the outcome is learners can use persuasive techniques to effectively pitch their ideas. So it's moving up a notch. It's not just about talking in meetings or talking in presentations. It's about what techniques you use to come across as persuasive. Again, might not be something that a lot of pre-work students have a lot of experience of. So we're going to start off with a lead-in, assuming no knowledge, give them a little definition for pitch, get them to think about what some persuasive techniques might be from what they've seen or what they've used themselves. And then they're going to get a task to do to try and be persuasive in a pitch situation. In this case, they're going to get some input materials like this infographic here, which is talking about an online magazine and the readership of the magazine, a description of their readership here. And then the task they get here is just a little email from the editor-in-chief. You have to imagine you're a journalist, and the editor-in-chief is saying to you, right, we need a new section for our online magazine, and I would like you to pitch ideas at our next editorial meeting. On the right-hand side, they get a little idea to help them. If students want that idea, they can use that, they can adapt that, they can add their own ideas to it, or they might have another idea for the magazine. That's entirely up to the students to go away with that. But then they get on to the task, which obviously, as we said, was pitching their ideas, practicing with each other, and then saying what they found most difficult about that task and what they think they did best. A little reflection on their own practice there. What they get next then is a dramatized video where they're going to see somebody doing exactly what they've done. So they've kind of done it themselves, and then they're going to watch somebody else doing it. And as you can see here, the questions aren't comprehension questions in the traditional sense of the kind of, somebody was saying earlier, is it real world? Yeah, I mean, sometimes we don't give them very real world tasks in the classroom. This is very real world here, because what they're being asked to do is look at this woman, how she's doing this pitch, how effective is this? And then they can kind of analyze the techniques that she's using. Underneath that, in exercise 6, there's a little bit of vocabulary from the video as well that can be practiced. So they're getting a little bit of how does this person doing this, and a little bit of reflection, analysis of how she's doing it. And then they get a little task at the end, which is a very simple framework here to help them with the task, which is, well, okay, what were some pros and cons of your approach to the pitch, and what were some pros and cons of the approach used by the woman in the dramatized video, and would you use any of those yourself in future? What's interesting as well is that the students get to compare their ideas with another partner or with in small groups, and that a lot of really interesting comments and views come out of that, and interesting learning and reflections, because people see different things with the video, and it's interesting to see what our preferences are and other ways of seeing things and doing things. So I think that's quite useful. The last thing I'm going to look at today then is business writing. And when I was looking for the pictures for this presentation, I came across this picture. It's from Jan Vermeer, the Dutch artist. It was done in the late 17th century, and the title is Lady Writing a Letter with Her Maid. And quite interesting about this letter is that at this time, the kind of typical letters that people were writing were in these paintings were love letters. And in the 17th century, people used manuals, writing manuals, to help them improve their love letter writing skills. So it's quite interesting, they wanted to impress their reader, and that 400 years ago, people looked for manuals to help them improve their writing skills. So that is a challenge for us today, of course, is how we're going to help our students improve their writing skills. And if you remember, this is what the CEFR said: can produce clear, well-structured, detailed text on complex subjects, showing correct use of organizational patterns, connectors, and cohesive devices. So we've got very clear information there about the kind of things that we want to be helping students with. Obviously, they want, at this level, C1 level, they're probably capable of writing quite simple, quite short transactional emails. Our pre-work students will have experience of essay writing, but not necessarily the kind of writing genres that they need for the workplace. So they're going to need help with report writing, proposal writing, minutes of meetings, kind of longer documents. They're going to be made aware of using correct register for the genre, and using certain writing conventions such as organizational patterns and structures, headings, for example. Let me give you a little run through, very brief overview of how the writing lesson would work. So they start off with a leading task, then they will look at a full model writing, a full report, for instance. We're going to look at them a moment. Then they will get an analysis of the structure and language used in that report. Then they'll get some notes to help them scaffolding their own writing task, do their own writing task, and then get some a self-assessment and some peer assessment, and then obviously the teacher will give feedback as well. Let me give you an example from a lesson here. So this is Unit 4 again on disruptors, and they're looking at supply chain choices. Again, wouldn't expect our pre-work students to know a lot about that, and maybe some of our in-work students wouldn't know a lot about it either. So you're going to keep the task simple here. You can see the question here to lead in is, why might a manufacturing company want to change a key supplier whose quality is good? So there's a bit of a mystery here. It's good quality, but you're changing. I mean, our pre-work students might think about, well, why would they want to change, for example, the mobile phone supplier? I mean, you can relate it to everyday situations, even if you're not familiar with that particular situation. So this is a kind of a leading question to get the students to read the report. I won't show you the report, but you get the idea. And then they'll get a little follow-up summarizing the report, choose the correct summary for the report. And then we're going to look at the analysis, the in-depth analysis of this report, and to help them with these 5 areas. So they'll get look at the report structure, questions about the structure of the report, questions about the vocabulary used, questions about the linking expressions, the building an argument, and measured language. So you can see these are all kind of actually vocabulary areas within the report and structuring the report. So the students will get a useful language box, and they'll also find this useful language in the report, some more useful language in the report, and they'll get some questions to deal with that, to analyze the language that's being used. This will, of course, help them when it comes to their own report writing task. So they'll get a similar task about a supplier and changing suppliers, and they'll get notes related to that. And then obviously what they're going to do is write a full report. Now, obviously for teaching online, this is a great opportunity to use the Google Docs to do collaborative writing, to share writing and develop together. Maybe in pairs they could work together. You could certainly get them to assess each other's writing by sharing documents with each other. The assessment stage here at the bottom in exercise C, you can see that they're given criteria to look for. So that says, look at your partner's report. Do they have a similar structure? So you're asking them to assess the structure of the report, and you're also asking them to look at the range of language used in the report. So is it using the type of language that come up in the model? Is it using the type of language that's come up in the useful language box? So there you go. You've got the kind of the task there is set out for them. It'll be really useful with the peer feedback as well, that they're maybe spotting errors and things like that. Obviously, the other big area of feedback is the teacher. And at this level, to help our students improve writing, you can give a lot of variety of different feedback methods. Again, it could be the shared Google document that you could be writing on. You could record your voice. I know some teachers do that, record video to give feedback. This is one simple framework that I use when I'm marking. So I would want to look to see how clear it is, how concise it is. This is where you find that students maybe are not using paragraphing well enough, or they're not using substitution for nouns. They're not using pronouns to substitute nouns. They're not using a good variety of vocabulary, so they might be repeating the same word over and over. I'll look at to see how complete it is. Has it all the complete information in there? Has it got all the details? Has it got all the right headings? I'd like, obviously, correct, I mean, in terms of both content and in terms of language. And courteous is an unusual one, but it's quite an important one, I think, to think about. For me, courteous in this context means, have you borne your reader in mind? Have you thought about your reader and the impression that the writing is going to give on them? Is it make it easier for them to read? Does it include unnecessary jargon that they might not understand? Are you aware of the connotations of the language that you're using? So those are kind of like my little 5C framework that you could use as one option for varied feedback. So that's it. Just to recap then, today we've looked at, I think, some of the key challenges for our students in terms of broadening and enriching their vocabulary, in terms of helping them with their reading skills and encouraging them to read more extensively, in terms of helping them with their communication skills, and also in terms of helping them with business writing at this level. Just to say finally that if you're aware of these resources for teaching online, so you can go into the Pearson English portal and find lots of interesting teaching resources and continuous professional development. You can find the My English Lab, obviously, for students and for teachers, so that students can be working with the audio, with the video, and with the exercises, and the teachers can look at the gradebook and see how students are getting on. And obviously the Active Teach, which is great because it's a digital version of the course book that you can share on a platform like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or the Google platform, and actually do that online with your students. And I'm going to hand back to Richard now to see if we have any questions. I can hear you.
Writing, should they need it?
Oh, I think that's a very good point. I think when we're talking about language competencies, I think yes, that's absolutely true. That people have a lot of quite fluent speaking by the time they've reached the C1 level, but they haven't had a lot of writing practice. And yes, I would spend more time working on writing for sure, definitely. You often find that they're C1 level speaking, but they might be B2 level writing. And so they do need to, competence is not uniform across all of the language areas. So they do need a lot more help with the writing. That's absolutely true.
Thank you. Do you have any tips if students are reluctant to use the new grammar and vocabulary items?
This is a difficult one, isn't it? Why are they reluctant to use that new vocabulary and grammar? Is it that they're finding it difficult? Is the level a bit too high for them? I think we need to make them aware of what the C1 level is. And we need to see them, if they can see that gap, that they're aware. I mean, for example, with my students with things like phrasal verbs, I've kind of made them aware. I showed them what the C1 descriptor was, and we talked about their use of and they all want to practice their phrasal verbs. They all want the opportunity to practice. So I haven't actually had a situation where students are reluctant, perhaps. It's just that they don't know that they need to be doing more work on that. And they need help to really see, to make it very explicit to them that they need to be developing their language in those areas, particularly if they want to reach C1 level. They need to know what the C1 level descriptors are, what a C1 level learner is, and they need to think about how they're going to get there. And if they're not developing their vocabulary, they're not developing their grammar, then they're not going to get to that level.
Thank you. So, but on the similar, I guess an extension of that on similar lines is, what can you suggest students do to improve their fluency speaking?
Yeah, speaking fluency again. There was some great ideas. I saw Bill Monk's webinar yesterday, and some great ideas in there. Really, if they need to speak their speaking fluency, then when they're watching videos, for instance, that they could do the shadowing technique where they're trying to speak like the person on the video. So you might use a very small extract of video or a very small extract of audio. It could come from the course book, or it could come from their own materials that they've got at home if they're watching films or whatever. Or you just use a short extract, and you might use a shadowing technique where you would play a very short extract, maybe say 10 syllables, and try and speak like the person. You kind of want to be able to imitate the fluency of a good non-native speaker or even a native speaker English, and the way that the English speaker. And the way to do that is to kind of have a favorite model that you want to practice and listen to them and record yourself and then analyze how well you're doing. Are you saying it like them? Are you saying it fluently? Are you saying it in the same amount of time as they're saying it? That's a really good technique, and it's a really good thing for them to do as part of their self-study, is that they get to practice, speaking and using a model and copying and recording and then comparing what the model said and how you said it, and noticing the differences.
Thank you. Moving on to other questions we've had. One is a more general question around business English students, and how do you encourage them to attend when a lot of them are actually working? How do you encourage them to attend lessons? What do you do, Margaret?
Yeah. Right, what do I do? I mean, again, I don't know if there's an easy answer to that one. I'm assuming that this person is talking about people who maybe they're at university but they're also working. I've had that situation, and I feel very sorry for my students if they're struggling to study maybe full time and they're working sometimes either full time or part time, and it's a case of it's encouraging them rather than forcing them, isn't it? I think it's making it possible for them to come. If they come late, at least they can come in, knowing what their situation is. I've certainly had people who are motivated and will come from a night shift of working on reception at a hotel and come into class at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then they'll go home. There's a certain amount of encouragement you can give people, but the basic motivation has to come from the students themselves, and you can do the best you can and they can do the best they can, but the motivation has to come from the students, I think, to attend class.
Thank you very much. Again, perhaps just reference to the current times that we're in, how does teaching online have an impact on learning business English specifically, if any difference from general English?
Well, I think if you're dealing with in-company students, they find it's not a big deal for them because they're dealing online all the time with customers and colleagues and suppliers. So it's not a problem for those small group classes, and it was a very easy transfer, I think, for those groups. I think a lot of people tell me that they're finding with university classes that are actually going really well. The students are very motivated. You can get them. The breakout rooms seem to be very successful. I don't know. I think specifically business English and teaching online, it reflects more the real world of what it'd be like going to work, I think, because they will be doing a lot of the time with people online. So it's kind of quite useful practice, I think, quite useful experience.
Good point. Again, perhaps this is these are personal reflections. How do you deal with over-smart and overconfident students?
Oh, over-smart and overconfident students. Again, I suppose it depends on the can you be over smart and overconfident? I suppose you can, yeah. It depends how many students you've got in the group. It depends on the group dynamic. I think it might be an issue where maybe I'm not sure where this question is coming from, but you might be worried that it's more intimidating for the weaker students. I think again, kind of group works helps there. If it's a bigger class, that you could put people in groups, and if I've got mixed ability groups, I'll be times when I'll vary the grouping. So the kind of the more confident, the more skilled students will go in groups together, or I might mix weak students with more confident students, depending. I think it's very, very important though, when you've got that situation, is they need to be aware that in the workplace they're going to meet lots of people with lots of different and that's the real world out there. So you're going to be dealing in international teams, people with all sorts of levels. So you don't want to come across as being a smart aleck because you want to be able to get on with people. Maybe that's one way of dealing with it, is to say, remember when you go out into the real world of work, you need to be a good team player and you need to be able to work with all types of people, with all types of language levels, and be able to mediate your language and be able to work well together with people, because that's a really important skill that employers are looking for.
Yeah, that's a good comment. We haven't got much time left, so just perhaps a couple more of the questions that have come through. When it comes to writing, the majority of my students are quite reluctant, and they can't even stand working in a group. What can be done in these cases? So reluctance to write and working in a group.
Yes, so that kind of collaborative writing, yeah, I think it is something that a lot of students need to overcome. I think perhaps at first because they can't see the value of it, because they haven't had experience of it. It's new. It might feel intimidating. It might be the thought of well, this is going to slow me down. I don't see the value of this. Whereas I think actually, collaborative writing does have a lot of value, and it's making students aware of the benefits of that. And seeing how different people approach the task. I find it really useful. I think when you get started, when students get comfortable with it and you're comfortable with it, then going through the writing process and planning things together. I think it might be very important as well that what you can do in class is things like the collaborative side of it, the brainstorming, the organizing, the ideas, and then maybe they want to write the final thing on their own. Absolutely fine, no problem at all.
Okay, thank you. One question was about C2. What do you think about using C2 level to stretch students?
Well, C2 level, what? I mean, C2 level is I suppose it depends what you're using for C2 level. I suppose really by C1 level, you're already using pretty much authentic video or authentic audio or authentic texts. So I'm not sure what you'd be doing at C2 level, what that might be, that you would be stretching them. I certainly wouldn't want them to kind of go into, for example, over complex language that might not be that useful for them. I wouldn't want them to go into really, really finer details of the grammar. So I'm not sure what C2 would be in that context.
Okay, thank you. And just final question, how do you handle a student who wants to focus mostly on fluency rather than accuracy?
Oh, yes. Again, yeah, no, it has to be dealt with, doesn't it? That they're aware that accuracy is an important part of communication, and that is what's going to mark them out as a good C1 learner, is that they're both fluent and they're accurate, and you need that combination. So it is very easy, I think, at C1 level to get into those kind of fossilized errors that you've got from B2 level, and I think making it clear to students that it's what's going to make the difference between them coming across as having advanced level of English and having a less advanced level of English. I think making them aware of the fact that those kind of fossilized errors or that limited vocabulary range or limited grammar range is going to be holding them back if they want to make progress with their language learning.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Margaret, for taking us through how to approach teaching advanced level learners in business English. Thank you all for attending. And thank you for your very interesting and diverse questions as well. We did have one or two questions about whether there is a recording of the webinar, which there is, and the link will be sent to you probably in the next couple of days, although it may take longer. You will also receive a certificate as well. But with that, thank you so much, Margaret, again, for taking us through advanced level teaching.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, for your help, and thank you everybody for attending today. It's been very interesting talking to you all.